Good evening. I'm Linda Laurel. Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. In 2010, authors Mark Halperin and John Heilman released the #1 best-selling book, Game Change. Casting the spotlight on the 2008 presidential election, the book spawned an Emmy and Golden Globe-winning television movie. Well, now the two authors are back with their follow-up, Double Down, Game Change 2012. Double Down delves into the headline-making election of 2012, offering insight into the personalities, party dynamics, and candidates that played roles in election year 2012. Tonight, to help us break down Double Down, we are very pleased to welcome editor-at-large and senior political analyst for Time magazine and senior political analyst for MSNBC, one of the authors, Mark Halperin. As always, leading our discussion, our hosts, David Jones and Gary Polland.
Well, thank you, Linda and Mark. It's a great pleasure to have you here, and your book, of course, is great, and we both read the first book, and of course, we watched the miniseries. Actually, I thought the book was actually better than the movie. But let's talk about what happened. I mean, and I'm the Republican here.
So you're going to tell me what happened then?
No. Romney really thought he was going to win this race up till election night. So was truly is already set in stone probably a week or two out.
I think three things were preying on Governor Romney, and it's a great human story. Like all the things we try to do in the book is tell stories from a human point of view. Governor Romney is a great contradiction. He's optimistic about America, he's optimistic about his grandchildren, optimistic about the economy overall, but about himself, he's dark and pessimistic. And so it was quite something for him to approach election day and actually think he was going to win. One, his pollster said he was going to win. Two, he was drawing huge crowds. I was with him in Ohio, 30,000 people at a rally in a cold night right before the election. And the third thing was he so fundamentally believed that Barack Obama was too liberal to be president of the United States that after 4 years people would see that and they'd vote for him.
And was it the case, do you think, Mark, that Chris Christie doesn't get picked as vice president? He then gets even with the Romney campaign by hugging Barack Obama a week, 10 days out. Yeah. And then Romney gets even with him by, or someone with Romney's campaign leaking all this negative information from the dossier at the vetting of VP. How does that work for you?
Well, Chris Christie played a huge role in the last campaign, and so for people who are interested in him now as a potential 16 candidate, he was a potential presidential candidate in 12. He was a big endorser of Mitt Romney. He was almost on the ticket, as we report in the book, and he spoke at the convention as the keynoter, and then, of course, with the aftermath of Sandy, you described as a lot of Republicans were angry by what some people described as a bear hug with President Obama. One of Governor Romney's advisors called it a French kiss, beyond a bear hug. But, those two guys emerged from the campaign with a good relationship. I don't know that people were trying to get even with him, but there certainly was a lot of anger around Governor Romney about Governor Christie. They thought maybe being overzealous in his enthusiasm for President Obama. Days before Election Day, you got the guy who gave the keynote address at the Republican convention out there doing a buddy film with the President of the United States of the other party.
But people did get even with other people through you in this book, wouldn't you say?
People say that all the time. We have 500 interviews for the book, and certainly there are people we interviewed who might have had an agenda or might have wanted to get even, but that doesn't matter to us. We're looking for the true stories of what happened, the high human drama involving Republicans and Democrats. So I don't think I know you couldn't find anything in the book that's agenda driven by somebody with an axe to grind, but if they're willing to tell their stories and their story turns out to be true, we're happy to print it.
It was the story of the Republican primary and the process with a zillions of debates with the candidates, which obviously were not necessarily ready for prime time. Was the story just all about gotcha?
There's a fair amount of that. I think the bigger story was the people who didn't run. Jeb Bush, Haley Barbour, Mitch Daniels, Chris Christie, Mike Huckabee. I think any of those guys would have been potentially stronger than Mitt Romney, but certainly stronger than anyone else who ran. Governor Romney, I won't say became the nominee by default, but I wouldn't object if somebody else said that.
And asking, I guess one of the questions David would have, was Obama really in that deep of trouble after his dismal performance in the first debate?
He was in big trouble on two occasions at least. One was in the fall of 2011 after a face-off with Congress when not only Republicans were saying he was weak and his political instincts were bad, but Democrats were. After the first debate, his team was not worried. They were worried, we report in the book, right before the second debate, when in a debate rehearsal, he had an absolute performance failure, and they had to do an intervention with him to say, Mr. President, there's something wrong. You're about to mess up number 2. You've got to do better in the second debate. What's wrong? The president admitted to them something Barack Obama almost never does. He said, I'm not sure I can do this. That kind of lack of confidence is not characteristic of this guy, but it was testament to how frustrated he was with Governor Romney, how bad he is at debates, and how little of an agenda he knew he had, which made it difficult for him to go out there and sell himself.
So you introduced the term through the book of fast and hammy.
Fast and Hammy.
Tell us what that is.
So they do this intervention with him. It's literally the day before the second debate. Their research showed, their focus group showed, people would forgive one bad debate, but if he had another bad debate, lethargic, didn't seem like he was into it as he had in that Denver debate, it would be a real problem. So they came up with, almost treated him the way the Republicans treated Sarah Palin 4 years earlier in her debate prep, where they said, throw out the briefing books, we're going to give you one-liners, memorize them, guess the questions, and then we're going to give you performance tips. They wanted him to speak faster, not slow and like a law professor, but fast, and they wanted him to be kind of theatrical. He hates the theatricality of politics, but he accepted their advice because he was at a low point, and so they would yell out to him, fast and hammy, if he was speaking too slowly or not theatrical enough, and it worked. And after a while, when they were rehearsing that day again, one day to go, he'd give an answer and they would applaud and they'd like it, and the President of the United States would say, that was fast and hammy, wasn't it?
So the big dog, he's in your book, Bill Clinton.
He is. Hard to write a book about American politics without including the big dog.
What do you think of his observation that Barack Obama gets the hard things right, but almost none of the easy stuff?
As always,
in politics.
as is almost always the case, Bill Clinton kind of gets to the heart of the thing. He's a big fan of President Obama's first-term agenda and what he passed, health care, the stimulus, auto bailout. But he thought it was a shame that President Obama couldn't do the small things, plays golf almost every weekend with his aides, his top advisors, almost never invites members of Congress, doesn't do the kind of backslapping, I just came from Austin earlier, LBJ Library. The president's focus groups they would do, people would say all the time during the campaign, why can't he be more like LBJ? Why can't he have members of Congress fear him, respect him, have a relationship with him? And Bill Clinton thought, man, if that guy could just do that stuff, which is pretty simple, he could put it all together.
That doesn't look like he's going to change, does it?
Early in this term, he did a little bit of that. He had some dinners with senators, but it doesn't look like it's going to change. The president, very smart man, but he seems to kind of learn lessons too quick. He has a game of golf with John Boehner and maybe one discussion, and then Boehner doesn't do absolutely everything he wants, and the president's attitude and effect is, well, why should I see Boehner? Nothing comes of it. So I think the president is pretty much done with the Republicans, and they're pretty much done with him. It does not speak very positively for what he could do in the balance of this term.
But you like politicians. Otherwise you wouldn't be in the business you're in.
I love them all.
And that's right, especially the ones that talk to you.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem from reading the book that Barack Obama even likes them. I mean, he says, I can only handle Bill Clinton in small doses.
Yeah.
He talks about the professional blacks that he doesn't like. He talks about the professional left that he doesn't like. I mean, what's he doing there?
He likes the people he likes. He doesn't much like politics. There's a paradox that emerges from the book we found. He's pretty good at politics. He's won 2 presidential elections. When he turns it on, even in the debates, he's pretty good. Doesn't like politics, doesn't like politicians much. Loves government, loves policy and trying to solve problems and briefing books, but he's not turned out to be particularly good at that for the most part, particularly now. So a guy likes what he's not good at and doesn't like what he is good at.
And of course, looking forward to the elections in the fall of 2014, if trends continue as we are today, and we know that's a long way away and the directions could change multiple times, but if it stays the same, and it would appear Republicans continue to hold the House and have a real shot of taking over the Senate, which essentially I guess would mean Obama's term in office is essentially over for any policy initiatives.
Yeah. Well, right now, if he can't turn the health care thing around, I think it may be over even before the midterms. Republicans aren't going to be inclined to work with him given how they feel about him and that they're on the precipice perhaps of taking back full control. We've never seen that. We've never seen a 4-year term where basically nothing substantial happens.
And maybe this is happening because of the thing you talked about is that Obama wasn't doing what we would call retail politics with senators and congressmen in Washington.
Wasn't doing that, but again, as we show in the book, he's on the eve of the second debate just a few weeks before the election, and he says to his aides, I don't have an agenda. When I ran the first time, I had a big policy agenda. I don't now. His mandate is Mitt Romney's a bad guy, shouldn't be president. That doesn't help him much now as he tries to get through a second term.
You introduce us to another term in this book called the Uncle Joe syndrome.
Yes.
You don't want to tell Mr. Polland about
Very
that?
hazardous. You want to avoid that.
Because he likes Joe Biden.
Joe Biden's a great character in the book. I love Joe Biden. He's just a great character for us to write about. He's a great public servant and a fascinating guy. his role in this administration and in the campaign is a fascinating story. He wanted a big role. He didn't play much of a role in 2008, only on the ticket for 2 months, and thought, well, last time it was basically the Barack Obama show. This time it's going to be the Obama-Biden show. And the president's aide's attitude was, no, you stay in your lane. We'll tell you what to do. So the story of how Joe Biden fought for a bigger role, then gets over his skis on gay marriage and announces that he's for gay marriage before the president sets him back. At the convention, he doesn't get the marquee slot, goes to Bill Clinton on Wednesday night. So he comes through it at a pretty rough period. Uncle Joe was this kind of caricature of him, which got some truth to it, that Joe Biden will often say things that he shouldn't say. People look at him as kind of maybe a little, I say doddering, but out of touch with modernity. And he really wanted to avoid that. He knew the more people thought of him as Uncle Joe, out of touch, the less power he'd have both inside the White House and more broadly.
Did you think that the Obama leadership seriously thought about dumping Biden from the ticket?
Well, as we report in the book, there's a lot of chatter about that in 2011, and it was roundly denied. What we report in the book definitively is they did think about it. They did some polling and some focus group work to say, if we swapped out Biden and swapped in Hillary Clinton, would that help the president's chances? They found that it didn't affect it much. People don't vote for the bottom of the ticket. But the fact that they considered it, spent money on it, again, this is the top levels of the White House, the chief of staff, and the president's top people, showed just how desperate they were, just how concerned they were about the president standing less than a year before Election Day.
And Joe Biden also was pushed back against, I guess is the term, by Obama's staff, because he wanted to do more on a certain outing in California. What was amazing to me about that part, please go into it, it's linked if you care to, was how it was that it was staff people telling the vice president, no side deals, sir.
He got his hand slapped down. He thought, again, he was trying to work his way into the political operation. He was scheduled to go to the West Coast, and they got wind that he was going to try to meet with some donors. He thought it was just a good idea to kind of do the kind of things the president doesn't. We talked about earlier, the president doesn't do retail politics. The vice president, extremely frustrated, like his friend Bill Clinton is, and would say all the time, can't the president just call this mayor or just call this congressperson? Can't he just treat donors this way? He likes the president likes him, but Joe Biden would be the opposite of kind of the style of politician as the president, and frustrated, and tried to sort of be the retail politics guy. But as you said, on that instance and some others, got his hand slapped down and eventually got excluded from the big political meetings because they didn't want him to be part of the inner circle.
But they don't slap down Hillary Clinton when she makes moves of that type. Because I remember from reading the book that she was able to hire whoever she wanted. Political people were put on the State Department payroll. Nobody said anything to her.
No, she's been a pretty autonomous actor, and she and the president have a great relationship. And despite Joe Biden's efforts to not be Uncle Joe, to be a big player, since the election, we write a little bit about this at the end of the book, the tilt in Obama world has not been towards Biden. It's all been towards Clinton. He did a big 60 Minutes interview with her where he laid hands on. And you've seen a bunch of the president's people at the staff level and political allies basically urge Hillary Clinton to run publicly, make it clear they'd be for her. I can't tell you a single person who's endorsed Joe Biden for president, and that's kind of remarkable given that he's been a loyal vice president, a big part of the team. But the Obama-Clinton ties, 4 years ago they were like the Hatfields and the McCoys. They're now basically a united political family, and Joe Biden's kind of the odd man out.
The Republican campaign, the Romney campaign, spent millions and millions of dollars developing what they thought was a supercomputer program. I think it was called Orca. And
Beached whale.
Yeah, exactly. And on Election Day, it crashed. How important did that end up being in terms of the outcome of the election?
I think that it clearly was at least symbolically important, but it was part of just a huge discrepancy between the mechanical proficiency of the Obama side and the Republicans. We write in the book that the Obama people were building an atomic clock and the Romney people were playing with Tinker Toys. Now look, the president had 4 years to do it, and you would hear Republicans say that all the time, but Mitt Romney owns a calendar. He knew when he ran, well, if I become the nominee, whether I become the nominee in January, February, March, April, whenever it is, I'm just going to have a few months to do that. And the Republican chairman knew that, and yet they failed to build anything like a proper infrastructure to reach the voters to turn them out. You look at Ohio, Florida, Virginia, the key battleground states. Republican turnout operation was nothing like the Democrats, partly the computers, but also the people on the ground.
In fact, they never even beta tested, is what I read on the work. And never tested.
Huge failure, and political malpractice.
How many times does the president come into a room with staff full of notes, as you described, happened in September of 2011? Was that the only time that you, or was that a common practice?
President's an inveterate list maker. When he sees a problem that he wants to solve, he'll sit down longhand and write out notes. And in one instance in this book, a pretty dramatic scene in the fall of 2011, again, at that kind of low point of the presidency up until now, the president wrote down a list of things, encouraged by his staff, that were kind of regrets of his, issues that he felt he should have spoken out more about in the first term, maybe would speak out more about in the second term. Pretty liberal agenda, and not an agenda that he talked much about in the campaign, but based on our telling of the scene, kind of where his heart was on things like gay marriage, which he did talk about, although his hand was forced, climate change, closing Guantanamo Bay, poverty. These are issues that animate the president, but he felt he couldn't talk about given the politics.
Obviously, you wrote the book 4 years ago, Game Change, that talked about how that campaign worked, and you all become essentially, they said, the new Theodore H. White, except it takes two of you, I guess, to fill his big shoes, but that's okay.
I could be the Theodore, he could be the White.
There you go. Yeah. What I'm interested in is, have we entered an era, based on your observations in the two books, where the Democrats start with such a sizable advantage, the Republicans basically, to win the White House, need to pull the political equivalent of an inside straight?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the period from Nixon through the first Bush 41 race, there was a phrase, a Republican electoral college lock. And there was no way for Democrats to win because Republicans started with too much. We've been pretty close to that, as we talked about before we started taping. You just take the states the Democrats have won now, 4 in a row or 5 in a row or 6 in a row, depending on the states. Just add those up, the Democrats don't have far to go. So Republicans can't play defense. They got to start playing offense. It's an electoral college problem, but it's a demographic problem. The reason states like Virginia and Wisconsin are not battleground, Iowa are now much more blue than purple or red, is because the demographics of those states are changing in a way Republicans haven't figured out. If Republicans solve their national problem, young people, Hispanics, African Americans, single women, if Republicans begin to solve those problems nationally, then some of those states that have gone from purple to blue could go back to purple, and they could be right back in it.
Well, how do you see this tied into the some call the Tea Party phenomena, or I call the 100%ers, where they take the position, if you're not 100% down the line with us, you're a rhino, and there's no place for you in the party. How do you win national elections with that attitude?
You can't. It's a suicidal political attitude. Look, there's a lot of energy in the Republican Party from the Tea Party, just as the Democratic Party has energy from labor unions. But if your agenda is perceived or is captive to just that slice of the party, you're not going to win. Republicans in 2012 had a presidential nominee who was not, despite his background, favored by the establishment. They wanted Chris Christie in the race, or Jeb Bush in the race, or Mitch Daniels in the race. But he also wasn't the candidate of the Tea Party. George Bush gets a bad rap for a lot of things, but as a politician, he figured out as a national candidate how to be the establishment candidate, but also appeal to the base of the party. People want lower deficits. They want less spending. The Tea Party is going to have to enunciate what that actually means, and they're going to have leaders who can appeal to them, but also to a broader electorate.
I hate to keep this thing on the personal level, which we did a while ago, which we were talking about Obama not liking politicians. What about the converse? Do politicians like him?
You know, he's alienated a lot of people in both parties, and in some ways you hear it more from Democrats. Republicans are a bit more detached from it. I was talking to a Democratic senator not that long ago, and a very prominent senator, a very long-standing, a lot of seniority, said, you know, the president has only called me twice about policy since he got elected, only twice. And I said, Senator, you better not tell your colleagues that, because a lot of them are going to be jealous. You got 2 phone calls. You know, they just don't have the rapport with him. And that turns them off, you know, not just to be stroked, but they just don't feel they're heard. The president's insular, his team's insular, and that's his personal style. And look, he got elected president twice. Beginning of his first term, he passed a lot of stuff, but I think now he needs allies, and he doesn't have very many of them in either party.
Haley Barber's, sorry, Gary, but Haley Barber, who is a friend of Gary's, had some comments about the Republican nominee as self-centered, tenured, and inauthentic.
Yeah.
And this guy, you know, he's grassroots. I'm wondering if that was an observation that you captured in other manners or through other people that you were interviewing or talking with?
Haley Barbour is a brilliant man and a great political ear, although when he was thinking about running on his own, he got into some trouble. He couldn't manage his own politics in that period. But as someone with a keen eye about Governor Romney, he was joined by Jeb Bush, Paul Ryan, Mitch Daniels, Chris Christie, all of whom eventually got on board for Romney, but all of whom, all the way through February of 2012, when Romney lost a few contests to Rick Santorum, all of them said, look, he's a nice man in his personal life, but he's not the kind of, doesn't have the kind of touch we need. Bill Clinton, who's got pretty good friends with Haley Barbour, said about Mitt Romney, and we quote him in the book, saying he's in the long line of work. He should not have a job where he's asked to speak to people in public. And that's the view that was shared by these other Republicans who felt whatever strengths he brought to it, he just didn't have the fingertip feel for human beings required to be a president like Barack Obama.
And I think the polls showed that when you ask between Obama and Romney, who cares more about people like me?
Devastating.
Romney got stomped.
Devastating. Now the president's numbers have come down on that score in his current troubles, but in the campaign it was not even close. Again, to go back to George Bush, since I'm here in Texas, George Bush 43 did great on that score. For a Republican, it's traditionally Democrats will do better, but he did great on that score. And it's not just a matter of style. You got to talk about stuff that makes people think you care about people like them.
So in the Republican primary, it was the case that Romney, it took him a while to get out of it. Mm-hmm. Were they just not anticipating Bain Capital being any more of a problem to them?
Great.
Given did they actually think they'd overcome that in the primary?
Great story in the book. They didn't anticipate Republicans would bring it up. You know, amongst the people who brought it up was Governor Perry. I like to say if you live in Austin long enough, you eventually become a socialist, apparently, because you wouldn't have expected Rick Perry, of all people, to attack capitalism, and vulture capitalism was a phrase I think he used. They didn't expect it to come up then, but they knew going back years. This has been an issue every time Governor Romney's run for public office. And yet we write in the book about how ill-prepared they were to take it on at the level the Democrats were going to attack. You know, the president, the super PAC supporting President Obama, they had a three-stage plan they'd worked out. They said, well, first we're going to hit Romney on Bain, then we're going to hit him on his record in Massachusetts, then we're going to hit him on Medicare and Social Security. They never stopped Bain because they started attacking him on Bain. They got no pushback. It was very effective. They did it all the way through Election Day.
And, you know, sort of on the human side, I was actually feeling a little bit sorry for Romney at one point because the 47% remark came out. The guy was exhausted.
Yep.
Could hardly stand up. You know, he tries to take a nap and wasn't able to. And then he makes the gaffe.
You know, we like to write about these politicians as human beings. This is not a book about polling and focus groups. It's about human beings and doing this tough competitive thing. Almost everybody who makes a mistake in politics, not unlike in real life, they do when they're tired. And we write in detail about that 47% day. The moment he said it, but backing up to the start of the day, up early, being questioned about a controversial story on the front page of the New York Times, and then flying on planes, going to fundraisers, doing a public event, exhausted, and as you said, you know, trying to take a nap and end up making a gaffe that maybe didn't absolutely cost them the race, but sure didn't help.
It sure didn't sound good. And I guess, do you think maybe the politicians, now they know for sure, they got to know that everybody's recording everything. There are no secrets anymore.
Yeah, you would have thought he would have known that. You know, the president's team confiscated people's cameras and phones before events. Worry about this. Governor Romney's folks went around and checked, but you know, that bartender put his camera on the bar and secretly recorded it. And Governor Romney should have known better. But not only was he tired, but he hated going to these fundraisers because donors all think they're like little mini George Wills. They've all got pundit questions to ask, and Governor Romney likes being a pundit too and likes to satisfy the donors. So they'd ask a process question, and then he'd answer with the process answer. And one of the reasons he didn't apologize for the 47% video was, amongst many, was they were worried, well, he apologizes for this. What if there's another video out there where he says something worse than that? We talked to a ton of people who said, yeah, that one was captured on tape. I heard him say stuff like that all the time at fundraisers.
So is anyone still talking to you, Mr. Halperin, after this book?
You know, people talk to us after the first book. I've not heard from one person saying, you know, sorry we talked to you or whatever. John Hamm and I have been doing this a long time, and people we hope will continue to talk to us, tell their stories.
Well, I guess the good news is no one's saying, you know, you made that up.
Nope.
You know, you don't hear people saying, you know,
nope.
Halperin lied.
No, people aren't saying that. They didn't say it about the first book. We're extraordinarily careful. We know that these books are going to get scrutinized. We're telling really compelling personal stories, the high human drama of running for president, candidates, spouses, their kids. we can't make mistakes, so we're super careful about what we put in the book.
So I take it you're already at work on the next book?
No, as we say in the TV business, stay tuned. We're focused on this one for now, but
it's coming.
We'll
With
see.
the election, I guess the campaign for the next election is actually already
It's
started.
kind of underway. Every night I dream about Ted Cruz.
I bet you do. And that could be a whole nother show, Linda.
That's a
Thank
whole
you so
nother
much,
show.
Mark.
Thank you
it's
all.
it's
Thank
a
you.
terrific book,
Appreciate it.
and people need to read it if they care about America, politics, and the like.
Or doubling down.
Right.
Double down. All right. Thank you so much. And remember, you can catch Red, White, and Blue every Friday at 7:30 p.m. right here on Channel 8, and again Saturdays at 6:30 p.m. We also invite you to visit us online and send us your comments. We want to hear what you are saying about the issues that affect Houston. You can submit your comments at houstonpbs.org or on Facebook. And while you're there, don't forget to like us. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again next week. Good night.